Dr. Robyn, I am so thrilled to be talking with you today. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me. So excited to do this.
Sure. Okay, can you first tell us about who you are and a little bit about your background?
So my name is Robyn Koslowitz. I am a clinical child psychologist, and I specialize in trauma and particularly in working with post-traumatic parents, which is all about how does our own trauma interfere with our ability to parent, and more importantly, what to do about it.
Okay, and you have a new book, Post-Traumatic Parenting. Tell us about this specific book and a short overview of what readers can expect.
So post-traumatic parenting is really kind of that all research is me search kind of project where 27 years ago, when I was pregnant with my oldest daughter, I knew I had PTSD, and I knew that my damage could damage my kid. I went to the stacks. I was a graduate student at the time, went to the stacks looking for any research at all on the impact of maternal PTSD. First, like sort of on a developing fetus. My big question was, if it's so painful for me to be inside my body, what's it like for this baby to be inside my body, like literally? You know, and I remember speaking to my OBGYN. Actually, he said to me, your blood pressure's a little high. You really need to calm down, which, you know, newsflash, I'm glad he didn't specialize in psychiatry, because telling anxious people to calm down never works.
Doesn't usually work.
So It was not great advice. And then it was like, how do I explain a flashback to a toddler, right? How do I help my kids understand, you know, when I sometimes dissociate so that it isn't scary for them? So it started becoming a project where I was just researching it, and there was really very little research at the time, because prior to 9/11, no one was really studying the impact of trauma on anything. Like now, trauma's everywhere. Mm-hmm. You look on TikTok and everything's a trauma response.
You hear that word a lot, yeah.
But back in the day, it just wasn't talked about until 9/11 happened. So there really was nothing. So some of it was me sort of figuring it out and piecing it together. And then, of course, the research started happening in conjunction with as I was working on this project.
You've worked with countless parents navigating complex emotional terrain. What was the defining moment, would you say, when you realized there was a missing conversation around trauma, you know, talking about we weren't really mentioning it until after 9/11 and parenting that needed to be addressed in this way?
So I think for me, I had this, it almost like hit me like a punch in the gut moment. I was on internship at that point working in a state hospital, and there was a parenting class that I was teaching, and it was sort of this jail diversion program where kids who had gotten in trouble with the law, with specific types of trouble, parents were sent to this parenting class. It was considered very cutting edge at the time, very progressive, and the idea was maybe you guys take a parenting class and then you'll parent more effectively, and then your kids won't get into trouble. It was, you know, nuisance type of trouble like graffiti and things like that. So I was giving this parenting class, which was all about effective parenting practices. And at one point I said something about normative parenting practices, like what parents typically do. And this mom in the class raised her hand and she said, I don't know what's normal. Like my childhood was, I was on a boat from Guatemala, and then I worked in my uncle's business, typically like all day as child labor. I don't know what normal is. I don't know what a normal chore to give my kid is. I don't know what's normal. I watch a sitcom and it's like, that wasn't my childhood. And I sort of sat down and I thought, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize this is what I've been studying all along. How can I give my kids a normal childhood when mine was anything but? And then I asked everyone in the room if anyone else has the same question. And the interesting thing about an urban hospital is you get a cross-section of society, right? You'll get people who are very high socioeconomic status, like, you know, really wealthy people. You'll get people who are living like hand to mouth. You'll get every demographic in between. Every single hand in the room went up.
Wow.
So every parent stayed, and we had this conversation. And that's when it really crystallized for me that this is what I want to teach, and this is what I want to do. It's not enough to just research the impact for myself so I understand it. I want to help any other parent who feels as alone as I did. Those years when I was pregnant and I was just thinking, I am so damaged. I am going to damage my kids. It's inevitable. What do I do about it? Were so terrifying and so lonely, and I felt so alone because there was nothing. No one was talking about this. And I just felt like if even one parent will feel less alone, that's sort of step one of the book. And then step two of the book is, what should we do about it? Because it turns out not only does our damage not have to damage our kids, it turns out that in parenting we can actually heal our damage.
Oh, that's so nice to hear you say. that we can, we can heal. Because you're right. It's such a frame of reference of our own experience, of our own, and it feels so alone unless we're all talking about it and knowing that there is something that can be done and that we won't damage our kids. You draw from both clinical expertise and personal experience. How did your own parenting journey influence this book's direction and tone?
So for me, it always was, like I said, the all research is me search thing. In fact, at the beginning of grad school, I was, studying in a lot of different clinics. Like I was working with kids who were encopretic, which is like kids who would lose control of their bowels, but no one knew why. There was no medical reason. I was working in a school for kids who were acting out and disruptive. I was teaching a parenting class. I was studying child development. And it wasn't until this woman asked this question that I realized, I'm studying the impact of trauma on child development. For myself, and my story is a little hard to hear, I grew up with a very, very ill parent. My father had a very severe heart disease throughout my childhood. I believe he became symptomatic when I was 5, and he would have heart attacks, very, very sick. My childhood was really fraught with my mom. We went from my dad being the primary breadwinner. My mom had a job. She was a guidance counselor in public school, but she wasn't the primary breadwinner, went to working 2 jobs to support the family and trying to keep a very sick husband alive. So my childhood just wasn't normative. And then he was just so sick. And here's where it's a little difficult to hear. When I was 16, he had his fatal heart attack, and I actually performed CPR on him. And unfortunately, he did not make it. For many, many years, I walked around thinking that I had killed him, that it was my fault.
That's a lot to carry, Robyn. That's so much to carry. Yeah.
It was a lot to carry, and I really believed this. And I always say, I speak to a lot of people. I speak to a lot of traumatized teenagers, and I speak to a lot of people who were traumatized as kids or teenagers. And a lot of times it's I call it being a duck. How you look at a duck and it floats down the river and it looks so serene, but then you look under the water and the legs are paddling madly just to stay afloat.
Sure.
And that's what it's like, right? I was a kid. I was in high school. I was, caring about, the social politics of my grade and getting good marks and, student government and all the things I was involved in. But at the same token, underneath there was this other whole track of, I killed my father. I can never make another mistake. And so for me, I learned what I now understand is I call it the trauma app in your brain, which is adaptation your brain creates to help you survive very overwhelming experiences. Whether it happens in childhood or in adulthood, when a severe trauma hits us, we come up with an adaptation, and that lets us keep going. For me, I had 2 things. I had perfectionism and I had dissociation. I am really good at focusing and getting work done and blocking everything out. I used to be really perfectionistic. Everything I did was done to a very high standard. Mm-hmm. Very, very hard to do that and parent. You can't parent perfectly.
Sure.
You can't be present and dissociate, right? It doesn't work.
Yeah.
So that was my story. For me, it was learning how to undo that dissociation, because I actually had this experience, and I think a lot of post-traumatic parents can relate. One of my kids said something to me that made me realize I had thought I was almost done with my trauma healing, because at that point I knew how to manage my panic attacks and I knew how to manage my flashbacks, so I thought I was good. And then when my son was 10 years old, he looked at me and he said, "Mommy, where do you go when you go away behind your eyes?"
Oh, wow.
And I remember I knew exactly what he was talking about, and it terrified me because I felt like, what do you want me to do? As if he said, "You're 5 feet tall. I really need my mom to be 6 feet tall. Just grow a foot. You want me to feel my feelings? If I feel my feelings, I won't handle anything. How will I manage? I'll yell at you." And I always thought that was the worst mom in the world. If I would yell at him, that would be the worst thing ever. I realized, wait, I'm not done healing. And I think for a lot of post-traumatic parents, our trauma adaptations work really well in life. And they work perhaps in the workplace. They might even work in a romantic relationship. They sometimes work well in friendship. But it isn't until our kids show us that it's not working as well as we thought that we gain the courage to actually work on it.
Oh, maybe this leads into my next question, actually, because we talk about the trauma app as being automatic but not inevitable. What kinds of internal or external cues can help people kind of catch themselves when it's being activated if we're not aware of it ourselves?
So it's such a great question, right? Because what I always say is it's not you. It's your trauma. Meaning parents will come to me sometimes and they'll say things like, "I yell at my kids," or "I dissociate when I'm around my kids," or I'm such a workaholic that I can't focus on my kids," or "I procrastinate and I don't get tasks done for my family that I should. Mm-hmm. And they feel such shame about those things that they're doing that are blocking them from parenting. The minute I point out that it's not you, it's your trauma that taught you to be that way. If you yell at your kids, there was a moment in your life when you learned that yelling was an effective way to reduce stress, right? If you space out when you're stressed out with your kids and you dissociate from them, there was a moment in your life when you learned that. There was a moment when you learned that it's safer to focus on work than it is to focus on relationship, or that you must do everything perfectly, and therefore you're afraid to make any parenting decisions, and therefore you procrastinate, right? There was a moment you learned to be critical and controlling. That's not you. That's your trauma. The shame, and there's so much shame around that when parents say, like, I woke up this morning intending to, like, not do the thing, and then I did the thing. So hard for parents. And when we point out that you've learned that in a moment of trauma, that's the trauma app in your brain activating, and you can deselect its permissions. That's incredibly counter-shaming.
Sure. I really like that explanation where we can separate it a little bit in our minds, where our trauma isn't us. You know, you can have that separate and thinking it's you, it's your person, you know. What is the danger, though, of not recognizing the trauma app?
So I think when you don't recognize the trauma app, you just think of yourself as the worst parent in the world, and you have so much shame that you never look at the incident and the moment that you did act in a way that's not consistent with your values and learn from it, right? You don't sit down and say, okay, wait, what have we learned in this moment? Let's look at it unflinchingly. I tend to yell when I have a lot of priorities that are competing for my attention all at the same time. And then I ask my kids to, like, give me a moment, and they won't. In that moment, I might yell, right? So maybe it's saying, wait a minute, I can't be doing that amount of things at that time, and I need to learn from that. But if I'm not going to unflinchingly look at that moment and say, hey, what did I do wrong here? Where did I go wrong here? Not because I'm bad, but because my trauma app took over, then I'll never learn, right? It's a very cringy thing that we have. I notice this in a lot of fields. Like, one of the things I do as a hobby, but also as a trauma recovery thing, is I'm involved in martial arts, and I've, been like an assistant coach in self-defense classes. And I've seen people where the coach will say, everyone look at yourselves in the mirror. And people, like, cringe, and they don't want to look at themselves in the mirror. It's a very common thing. You give a speech, you don't want to watch it. It's very common, but you're never going to learn other than watching your stuff as if you are somebody else and taking notes on your performance and figuring it out. Like, oh, I thought, with martial arts, I thought my arm was above my head, but turns out it was barely at chin level. Okay, then. And it's like that in anything. We don't like to critically examine ourselves because we get that big shame response, which I'm going to argue was taught to us by some traumatic experience. Because my definition for trauma is just any experience that's too overwhelming for your brain to metabolize. So there may have been that moment when, someone laughed at you at gym class, someone pointed out that your run is a little bit funnier than the other kids, and you just internalize a sense of shame where it's just like, okay, no one taught me to run differently. Big deal, right? Your handwriting was a little messier, or you got the wrong answer in algebra and you raised your hand and you confidently said 3 and the answer was actually 13, right? And everyone laughed. And that was a mini trauma that trained your brain. Oh no, people laughing at me, worst thing ever. I can't do it.
Sure.
Me laughing at me, worst thing ever. I can't ever do it again.
Well,
just information.
Just information. You're right. One of the book's central ideas is that unprocessed trauma can become part of our parenting script. How can a parent tell the difference between instinct and inherited emotional patterning?
So this is the biggest problem, and I'm glad you pointed that out in the book, because it's a point that sometimes people miss. The problem with trauma is your gut instinct, right? Your gut can be either very, very, very right or very, very, very wrong. Two things can be true at the same time.
Sure.
So let's say I'm giving a speech, right? The potential for embarrassment is very high. My trauma app is correct. I could mess up, and all sorts of things could go wrong. People may laugh at, but when my trauma warns me that then I will die, or it will be so intolerable, I will never recover from that sense of humiliation, that's where the trauma app is. It's telling the truth, but it's also lying. So much of parenting is gut instinct, right? We talk about like maternal instinct, let's say. We almost miss a lot. I don't know what the word is. Like we put it on a pedestal, this idea of like maternal instinct.
Oh, so
but
true. So true.
And it's so hard because they hand you the baby in the hospital and they're like, here it is. And you're like, where's the maternal instinct? Like,
isn't it supposed to kick in?
Nobody downloaded it. What app store do I go to? Where do I get it?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The thing is, trauma really does make it hard for us to interpret our gut and to relate to our gut. So what we have to do is first process our trauma and sort of say to the trauma app, thank you, trauma app. This is amazing information you're giving me. It is true. So if my trauma app is telling me that 9,000 things could go wrong if I give a certain speech, data in terms of, you know what, I will prepare for that. If someone asks me that question from left field, I will come up with an answer for it. If, I don't know, my outfit gets a stain on it on my way there, I will bring an extra outfit. Like, all of that is super helpful, trauma app. Thank you. You're problem solving in advance for me. But when you're telling me don't go, that means you're trying to keep my life very, very, very small. And the thing about parenting is inherently it keeps our life very, very, very big, right? We're the big for our kids.
And Dr. Robyn, many people might say, you know what, I don't have trauma, or minimize their past. How do you define trauma in a way that invites more people into this conversation without totally alienating them?
Yeah, so the thing is, right, people don't like to say that they're traumatized. It makes it sound damaged, right? It sounds like, wait, I have a ding. There's something wrong with me.
There's
I'm
something
50%
wrong.
merchandise,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But the truth is, when you look at trauma as, like I said, this experience that's too big for your brain to metabolize, or when you look at trauma as an instance of very painful learning that made you say, wait a minute, who am I again? What is my place in the world? What is my sense of safety and where does it come from? Then you can see that trauma is a much bigger definition than the way we look at it. So being laughed at in, gym class in third grade was a trauma. Was it a trauma that, overwhelmed you to the extent where, is it, where you thought you were going to die? No. But if your brain was overwhelmed in that moment, and based on that, you came up with an adaptation, like no one will ever laugh at me again, and you came up with a way to make sure that no one will ever laugh at you again, that was an experience of trauma. Very often in my post-traumatic parenting classes, I talk about this idea called trauma poker, which is we focus way too much on the details of a traumatic experience. People like hearing oh my gosh, this person was raised by a stepdad who beat her, and that person had a stepmom who burned cigarettes on her. And it's almost like a game of trauma poker where, oh yeah, your stepdad beat you. Well, my stepmom did this. Oh yeah. Well, you know what my dad did? Well, you know what my brother did, right? The problem with trauma poker is no one ever wins. And it makes no sense. And also what I find is when people play trauma poker with each other, you never know what element of the story traumatized someone.
Mm-hmm.
In my book, I talk about a woman who lost her mom to cancer and then because of that became very much of an emotional eater, gained a lot of weight. Her friends stopped talking to her because they honestly didn't know how to treat her. They were 11. Nobody in the school said anything to her. She came back to school right after her mom died, and even the teacher didn't say anything. So the kids didn't say anything, and then they sort of just dropped her because they were uncomfortable. And she turned to food, and she gained a lot of weight, which opened her up to teasing and bullying. And in the post-traumatic parenting classes, she talked about how the teasing and bullying in many ways caused more damage to her psyche than losing her mother did.
Wow.
But everyone would say that losing her mom was the quote-unquote thing I don't believe in, which is the big T trauma, because it makes its way onto that, the research list of adverse childhood experiences is the death of a parent. The shaming and the social ostracism and, the kids making fun of her. So she had no one to turn to for comfort, her very critical stepmom. Those things actually created much more damage. They created the trauma adaptation. So it makes no sense to play trauma poker because no one ever wins. And it's just such a misunderstanding of how trauma works. So anyone who gaslights themselves out of their trauma where they go, oh, my husband was raised in poverty and he barely knew where his next meal was coming from. I just had a parent who was a functional alcoholic and I never knew if I was coming home to calm, nice mom or critical, mean, bitter mom.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not traumatized. You can't compare. They're both traumatic.
You write about reparenting yourself while parenting your child. What does that look like in practice, especially in real time when trauma comes into how you parent in those parenting moments?
So this happened to me, and this is the thing I tell every post-traumatic parent, which is your inner child cannot raise a child, but in raising your real-world child, you can also heal your inner child. And inner child sounds very woo-woo, but I'm literally talking about neuroscience, the idea that our brains are very neuroplastic when we parent. The entire thing we're trying to do when we do trauma therapy is to rewire neural connections in our brain. And I believe inner child is a metaphor for neural connections in our brain that aren't serving us anymore, that are like ghosts of former parts of ourselves, right? So what happens is, for example, for me, I was not raised with a young, healthy dad. So I never experienced that experience. And my husband was a young, healthy, involved father. So sometimes he would come home and he would start roughhousing with the kids, as dads do, right? And like there would be tickle monster chases and, the fun stuff. And I would get irrationally angry because I'd be like, it's bedtime. Why are we riling the kids up? She hasn't done her homework yet. He hasn't taken his bath yet. We haven't finished dinner, whatever. And I would just get, and this is another clue, by the way, that it's your trauma or your inner child. I would get disproportionately angry. When I sat down and unpacked that, I realized my inner child is so jealous. My inner child never experienced that. Like little me is just looking at this roughhousing and thinking like, I never had a dad do that. I had a wonderful person for my father, but I never experienced play in this way. So I would get so irrationally and disproportionately angry. Eventually, I learned how to create a script where I would sit down with my inner child and I would say, right now, we are going to join in the play from the perspective of the parent. Like, we're going to play too, and you're going to experience that. You're going to join in. And I went from tolerating it and being okay with it and enjoying watching it to like, maybe I can play too. I can also be the fun parent.
Right.
Right? And then it was so fun.
Sure. And it's wild that like, because we don't think about that with our inner child, that like all that we experience in our own frame of reference can come out in how we are parenting our own kids. And we need tools for the in the moment resets when you're just in the heat of it, like you said, and just yelling and just very upset. Can you walk us through one or two practical tools that helps parents and help us regulate when we're feeling emotionally hijacked and we're like out of control?
Yeah. So first of all, I want to say one other thing to keep your eye out for is when you are using language to talk about your kids or your parenting that sounds much younger than your age, that's a clue that your inner child might be trying to parent your child.
Ah, okay.
Like I had someone in a post-traumatic parenting class say that, her 11-year-old is such a selfish brat that she doesn't want to do chores. And I remember thinking, that doesn't sound like an adult, right? That sounds like a sibling, right? That's how like a 14-year-old talks about her 11-year-old sister. So when we unpacked it, sure enough, she had been parentified from a very young age, and her inner child was jealous at like her 11-year-old ability to say no to chores because she ran the home when she was 11. So being able to like notice that. But a lot of what I try to do is sort of notice the trauma app speaking and say, hi, trauma app, you're here. You're telling me that if X, then Y. If stressed out, then dissociate. If stressed out, then yell. If stressed out, then people please. I am going to mindfully, I literally envision like, those menus on your phone. I am going to deselect that permission right now. And even if it's really uncomfortable, I am going to do the thing I don't want to do. I am going to not space out. I'm going to remain present even though it's stressful. I am going to like be here right now. And that might mean I'm going to do some grounding exercises. Like I'm going to notice 3 things in the room that are red and 4 things that are yellow and 2 things that are blue, just to bring myself back here. I'm going to say no to my kid, and it's going to be very uncomfortable. And I'm going to hold firm to that no, even though my kid is mad and you are telling me that mad means danger. That's okay. Sometimes it's like I'm feeling really stressed out, so I'm going to sing everything that I say to my kids for the next half hour instead of speaking.
I like that too when you said the visualize the menu on your phone of just clicking it off. Just click it off for the moment.
Yeah, and it's not, when you do that, it takes a second, and then automatically you just have that moment to be able to handle it. And also, by the way, there's nothing wrong with telling kids. I had so much fear about like having a flashback in front of my children, and always worried, like, what if my kids notice me having a flashback? Because my flashbacks are pretty intense. There's nothing wrong with telling the kid. Right? Even telling a 3-year-old, mommy's having very big feelings right now, so I'm going to need a break and I'm going to drink some water until I feel better. They're fine with that. They get it.
It's us that doesn't give ourselves a break, but they're like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, go.
Yeah, no problem.
Get a drink of water. And many parents, like we carry that internalized shame around. We're not good enough. We're not a good enough human. We're not good enough for our kids. How does shame function in trauma-affected parenting, and what would be your advice for loosening that grip?
I think, first of all, I love the acronym for shame. It just should have already mastered everything. I think that a lot of post-traumatic people become perfectionists as part of their trauma adaptation in one way or another. We look at anything that we can't do as, but I should know how to do this already. A good mom would know how to do this already. How could I yell at my kids? A good mom would know how to not yell at my kids, right?
Yeah.
Like we just like assume that there's something deficient about us, especially if you were hiding trauma in your childhood where you're always putting on a show. Like I was always trying to pretend to be normal in high school. Like, I did not want anybody to notice that I was having flashbacks because, newsflash, seeing things that other people can't see is not a great sign for your mental health. So I didn't want people to see that, right? So we were very used to like pretending and putting up that front that we're fine. But the truth is that you don't have to put up that front, right? It's okay. So the most counter-shaming thing is admitting I'm not perfect. Like, it's okay. I'm gonna make mistakes.
Yeah.
My kids need present me. They don't need perfect me. I think a lot of the social media stuff nowadays with like gentle parenting scripts sadly like sort of feeds right into parental perfectionism where, there is a perfect way to do it. If I just memorize this script, then it will be perfect. But your kids don't want a script. Your kids want you. Scripts are nice as like a template to start off from. Like, come to think of it, that is good information to include. Or, I better start with I'm not mad at you before I say anything else about when I give this kid feedback. It is good to prioritize that. But after that, it needs to be my own word.
It needs to be me. I heard this thing the other day, and it stuck out to me where kids don't want a perfect mom. They want a happy one.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's so true.
But even that, happy, like the imperative to be happy, you're not going to be happy all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I think what kids want is an authentic mom. I think if I'm not happy, I don't want to pretend to be happy. Also don't want my kids to be worried that it's their fault if I'm unhappy or that they need to do something about it. I think it's so much better if I say to my kid, I'm having a lot of big emotions right now. It's nothing to do with you, right? I'm not mad at you. I'm sad. Someone said hurting words to me at work today, and I'm a little bit sad about them.
So they're not taking it personally that it's about them.
And it's not like, and I think it's very eerie for a child when a parent like puts on that like smile. I'm not sad. No, I'm happy. I'm fine. I'm good. Like, no, I'm legitimately sad about something. You did nothing wrong. And then kids can be very kind sometimes where, again, it's not their responsibility, but they can be very kind about like, I remember once saying that to one of my kids who was like 5 at the time, said, somebody said really hurting words to me at work and I'm in a little bit of a bad mood. And they came and brought me their teddy bear. Hugging my teddy bear makes me feel better, Mommy. It was just so sweet. And you know what? It did make me feel better more because the kid was sweet than the teddy bear. But It's not your job to fix me, right? It's my job to deal with my emotions. Yeah. But at the same token, that was sweet, right? I'm glad I'm raising a child who has empathy.
You talk about parenting with the connection. What inner work is required to build those muscles, especially when they weren't modeled, maybe in our childhoods, in our own experience?
So here's, Dan Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson boil down attachment, right? This whole idea that we want to give our kids secure attachment. They boil it down to 4 things. That you want to make kids feel safe, soothed, secure, and seen. And if you think about it, safe, soothed, and secure are all about safety, right? You want to make them feel like you are their sturdy base and like you've got this, you'll keep them safe, you're the parent, you're going to protect them. And seen is, so it's all about sharing our sense of calm. And then seen is all about sharing our sense of joy with our kids, right? Like, I delight in you. I attune with you. I love it. It's so cool to like watch you, like, look, Mom, no hands. And it's like, yay, you're doing it, right? But what does trauma take away from us? Our calm and our joy. So if we can just say, I can restore my calm because I'm going to work on my trauma because parenting is the opportune time for me to do that. And then the crazy thing is parenting then restores our joy. We awfulize parenting so much. There are so many parenting books, and I get it. Very easy to sell a book if you're like, terrible thing will happen unless you read my book. Quick, buy it. I get why we would do that. Like, from a marketing perspective, it makes perfect sense. But parenting is so joyful.
It really
is. And
it's
so much fun, right?
Yeah, it really is. And your experience, Dr. Robyn, how do parents start building a sense of like that self-trust again, where we want to have, we want to get back to feeling like parenting is fun, parenting is joyful, especially after years of parenting from a place of like just trying to survive and not intention.
So I think getting to know yourself again, right? And really sitting down and figuring out your values. What is important to me? Sometimes our kids are the entry point in because we won't do it for ourselves, but we will do it for them. So sitting down and saying, what do I value? What's super important to me? And then you create your values based on that. If you know your values, you're starting to create a sense of self, right? Because I am a person who values X over Y. That tells me something about you, right? And sometimes trauma tells us we have to be all the things at all the times and do all the things. But if you value being a family that, does spontaneous things, and is creative, then you're not also valuing being a family where everything is extremely organized and predictable and neat and clean, because you can't do both at the same time. And either is good. You can say, you know what, I grew up in total chaos and I want my home to be organized and predictable and neat, and that's super important to me that the kids know like dinner is the same time every night and that there's like healthy food in the fridge and that the house is clean and wouldn't fail a health inspection. I get that value, but then you can't beat yourself up if you're also not being spontaneous all the time and doing crazy wacky things and turning your house into like an internal amusement park or something like that.
Right.
Because you can't do both of those things, right? You could pick one. Sometimes by figuring out your values, that's the only way you figure out your sense of self. In the book, I have like 5 post-traumatic parenting types. One of them is the paralyzed parent, which is someone who really doesn't know what they want to achieve. So they're trying to do all of the things. And that parent, when they figure out their values, they start figuring out who they are. Like we do it back. Not who am I, therefore what are my values? What are my values, therefore who am I?
Oh, that's so good. Start with like, who are we? Start with your values, go back to who you are. And there's hope for all of this, which is what your book offers. It's not just insight, but hope. What gives you the hope or can give us the hope that change is possible, even for those who've lived with trauma for decades?
Right. And I think whether we've lived with trauma for decades or whether it's like COVID, right, that was your first instance of trauma where the whole world was rocked on its foundation. Because I think a lot of post-traumatic parents, it wasn't childhood trauma. Maybe they had some of the predictable traumas of childhood. Somebody mocked them in grade school, or the mean girls didn't let them sit at their table, or, that type of trauma.
Yeah.
And, they came up with a trauma adaptation and it worked. But then COVID happened and the entire world changed. And I've got kids depending on me, and like my entire industry doesn't exist anymore, or we moved states because of financial stuff. Like a lot happened over COVID. I don't think it's an accident that this book got so much attention in terms of like getting the project out there, and the social media community that we've developed happened over COVID, because all of a sudden it became very, very clear that like parenting with trauma is really hard to do.
Yes, and I like that we have hope that there can be change, and you have a great message. And let's wrap up with that. Actually, what do you want someone who's listening right now to know if they're feeling discouraged, triggered, or overwhelmed by their current parenting experience?
So the first thing to know is it's never too late. No matter what stage of parenting you're in, whether your kids are like 5 months or 5 years or 15 or 35, you can always repair with them. You can always parent differently. The entire part 3 of the book, I boil down the how to parent to like what's important and ignore everything else. Like sort of now that you understand the impact of trauma on your parenting, you figured out what type you are, here is what to do. Don't worry about what social media tells you. It really boils down to there's 2 important things in parenting: being responsive, which means kind, authentic, validating, connected, and being responsible, teaching our kids skills to navigate the demands of the world. If you're doing those 2 things, you're doing a lot better than you think, right? Like, and don't get hung up on like, but this influencer says that if you're not baby wearing till your kid is 4, then you're harming attachment forever. Like, do what works for you, provided you're hitting R2. If you're responsive and responsible, your kids are going to be okay. If you're making a mistake, the nice thing about kids is they will give you that feedback. They will correct you, right?
Yes,
they will tell you.
Yes, they do.
Right? And that's great, because you'll be there to hear it, and then you'll fix it.
Exactly. Oh, this is such a good conversation that I know is so relatable for so many people. Dr. Robyn, thank you. Where can we find your book and follow along?
So you can find my book wherever you get books. It's on Amazon. It's in Barnes & Noble. It's in all the, ask your local independent bookseller. You can find me on social media. The post-traumatic parenting community hangs out at Dr. Koslowitz Psychology on Instagram. And I also have the post-traumatic parenting podcast and YouTube channel, where I do more in-depth interviews, and I also do YouTube. I respond to listener questions with parenting techniques, or like people will bring a book to my attention and ask my opinion on it, and we like look at those things through a trauma-informed lens, because I just never want another post-traumatic parent to feel alone on this journey. Your trauma does impact how you parent, but at the same time, your parenting can heal your trauma, and that to me is the most hopeful thing.
Oh, that's so good. Thank you so much for that message. Thank you for the information, sharing your experience, just helping us through this parenting life, because it can be tough. But you know what also could be joyful and fun, just depending on how you see it. So we appreciate you. Dr. Robyn, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me. I enjoyed our conversation so much.
So did I. Thanks, Dr. Robyn. And thank you for listening to another episode of Fresh Off the Set. Please rate, review, and subscribe, and we will see you next week. Congrats, you made it to the end. If you want to continue to freshen up your day, you can watch us on Fresh Living every weekday on CBS Channel 2 in Utah at 1 o'clock. You can also watch us on our YouTube channel, KUTV Fresh Living, and follow us on social media. We will see you next week.